I wasn't supposed to be home that early. My trip got cut short, and I thought, why not surprise my husband? After 22 years together, I knew his routines, his habits. But nothing could have prepared me for what I walked into. The bedroom. Doctor was slightly open. Laughter. Movement. And then, I saw them. My husband. And my mother. My mother. Tangled in sheets that still smelled like me. I froze. The air in my lungs turned to ice. Then, she turned to me, completely unbothered, and said something that shattered me more than the betrayal itself. That moment changed everything. And what came next? It was only the beginning. I wasn't supposed to be home that early. My flight landed ahead of schedule, and instead of calling, I wanted to surprise my husband. After 22 years together, little surprises kept things interesting. At least, that's what I thought. As I pushed the bedroom door open, my entire world shattered in an instant. There, tangled in my sheets, was my husband, but he wasn't alone. My mother, the woman who raised me, the person I trusted most, turned her head toward me, utterly unfazed. And then, the words that still echo in my mind. Get out. This is my room now. I stood there, frozen, as the weight of betrayal settled deep in my chest. My mother didn't even look ashamed. My husband, on the other hand, had the decency to reach for the sheets, covering himself as if that would somehow make this situation less horrifying. This is a dream, a nightmare. But no amount of blinking or deep breathing could erase what I had just seen. My mind raced, trying to grasp the impossible. 22 years of marriage, 3 children, and all this time, had I been nothing more than a fool? My hands trembled as I clutched the doorknob, torn between demanding answers and running until my legs gave out. Then, as if the universe hadn't humiliated me enough, my eldest daughter appeared in the hallway. Her wide, horrified eyes met mine, and in that moment I knew this wasn't just my betrayal. It was hers too. The weight of the moment crushed the air from my lungs. How do you explain to your child that the grandmother she adored had just stolen her father? The silence stretched between us, heavy and suffocating. I opened my mouth to speak, to say something, anything. But nothing came. My mother, still lying there, sighed impatiently, as if we were the inconvenience. And then, as if sensing the storm brewing inside me, my husband finally spoke. A quiet, broken confession slipped past his lips. This isn't new. My stomach churned. My mother turned away, suddenly uninterested in the disaster she had created. I felt the floor beneath me shift, as if my entire life had been built on a fault line, ready to crumble at the slightest shake. What did he mean by this isn't new? My fingers curled into fists, my pulse pounding in my ears. I had a feeling I was about to find out, and I wasn't sure I could handle the answer. My heart pounded as I stared at him, waiting for an explanation. Some pathetic excuse, some desperate lie I could cling to. But when he spoke, the truth hit me harder than I ever could have imagined. It started when we were 18, he admitted, his voice devoid of remorse. Back when we lived in your parents' house. I felt my stomach drop. That was before we were even married, before we had kids, before I even had the chance to suspect a thing. I wanted to laugh at the absurdity of it, but the rage in my chest burned too hot. My mother, my own mother, had been with my husband for over 2 decades, and I had never seen it. I could barely process his words as he kept talking as if ripping my life apart was just another conversation for him. We never stopped, he continued, rubbing his face, avoiding my eyes. Every month without fail, no protection, no hesitation. The room spun. I gripped the edge of the dresser, trying to steady myself. I had kissed this man, slept beside him, raised children with him. And all along he had been, what? Splitting his life between me and my mother? A fresh wave of nausea rolled through me. Had she smiled in my face while carrying his child? The thought nearly knocked the air from my lungs. I wanted to scream, to throw something, to hurt him the way he had just gutted me. Instead, I forced myself to ask the one question I wasn't sure I wanted the answer to. Did she ever love Dad? His hesitation said enough. He exhaled, shaking, his head. I don't know. A bitter laugh escaped me, raw and humorless. My entire family had been a lie. My mother had spent years pretending to be a devoted wife while sneaking around with my husband. And him? He had built a life with me while secretly sharing one with her. I didn't know who I hated more. Then, an even worse thought crawled into my mind, making my skin go cold. If they had been together this long. I swallowed hard, dreading the words even as I said them. What about the boys? He finally met my eyes, guilt plastered all over his face. I don't know. The walls seemed to close in around me. My 3 sons, our 3 sons, might not even be ours. The betrayal ran so much deeper than I'd ever imagined. And now, there was only one way to find out the truth. The weight of his confession pressed down on me like a boulder. I don't know. That was all he had to say? 20 years of deceit, of stolen moments, of my entire life built on a lie. And he had the nerve to look uncertain? I turned, my mind racing toward the only thing that mattered now, my children. My daughter, my baby girl, was still standing there, frozen, her face drained of color. She had heard everything, seen everything. And the way her hands trembled, the way her breath hitched, she wasn't just hurt. She was broken. My mother had betrayed both of us. And my husband? He had destroyed more than a marriage. He had shattered a family. But the nightmare wasn't over. Not yet. Because the moment I stormed out of that cursed bedroom, determined to get as far away as possible, I ran straight into my father. His eyes flickered with confusion, concern, until he saw my face. Until he noticed my daughter, shaking, barely able to stand. And then, before I could say a word, my husband followed behind me, his presence an open wound. My father's gaze shifted to him, then back to me, searching for answers. I could barely find my voice. Dad. But I didn't have to say it. He must have seen the devastation in my eyes because within seconds, his expression twisted into something unrecognizable. And then, the final blow. My husband, as if possessed by some sick need to keep confessing, muttered the words that sent my father's entire world crashing down. The boys, they might be mine. Silence, heavy, crushing. My father's body went rigid, his breathing sharp and uneven. He had spent the last 20 years raising my brothers, his sons, believing they were his flesh and blood. And now, with one sentence, that certainty had been ripped away. His hands curled into fists at his sides, his face paling before my eyes. He staggered back a step, then another. I reached for him instinctively. But what comfort could I possibly offer? We were both drowning. My daughter let out a choked sob before running out of the house, and I couldn't even blame her. If I could run from this, I would. But there was no escaping the damage done. My father finally spoke, his voice hoarse, empty. We need answers. He didn't have to explain. I knew what he meant. A DNA test. Proof. As if proof could somehow make this less of a nightmare. But deep down, I already knew. We weren't going to like what we found. There was no easy way to do this. No way to soften the truth or shield anyone from the storm that was about to hit. But after everything, I refused to carry this burden alone. My family, our family, deserved to know the truth. So, I did the only thing that made sense. I called a meeting. A full-blown, all-hands-on-deck family gathering. And when I say everyone came, I mean everyone. My siblings, my father, my husband's family. They arrived confused, curious, expecting maybe some awkward announcement. What they got? Instead, a grenade tossed right into the middle of their reality. I didn't waste time sugarcoating it. Mom and my husband have been having an affair for over 20 years. Gasps. Stunned silence. My father sat stiffly, his jaw clenched so tightly I thought he might shatter his own teeth. My brothers, my maybe-not brothers, looked between me and our mother, their faces twisted in disbelief. And then, the final blow. There's a chance the twins and our youngest brother aren't actually dads. The room exploded. My younger siblings' expressions morphed from confusion to sheer horror. My mother, sitting there like a statue, finally spoke. You didn't have to tell them this way. The audacity. The betrayal cut so deep that choosing sides became inevitable. Most stood with me, supporting my father, my children, and the wreckage left behind. But of course, there were those who twisted the knife further. My sister, my own flesh and blood, scoffed. This is a family matter. You shouldn't have aired it like this. Oh, the irony. As if the affair itself hadn't dragged us all through the mud. And then my husband's family, the ones who should have been just as disgusted, had the nerve to defend him. Marriage is complicated, his aunt murmured, as if that excused decades of deception. But the worst part? The damage was already done, and there was no undoing it. The fallout from this revelation was spreading like wildfire. My mother, once the respected matriarch, was suddenly a pariah. My father, drowning in humiliation, barely spoke. And the DNA test? That loomed over us like a ticking time bomb. The truth was out, but the consequences? They were only beginning. For years, my mother had built a reputation, the devoted wife, the loving grandmother, the guiding voice at church. And now she was just a woman who had burned her own house down. It didn't take long for the news to spread beyond our family. Whispers turned into full-blown conversations. The church she had dedicated decades to, the very place where she preached about morals and values, didn't hesitate. The moment the truth came out, they stripped her of her title. No more leading Sunday school. No more warm smiles from the congregation. She wasn't their moral compass anymore. She was the scandal. At first, she acted unfazed, pretending the judgment didn't bother her. But I saw the cracks forming. The way she avoided going out. The way she stopped answering calls. She had spent years parading around as a woman of faith, and now? She couldn't even set foot in the church she once claimed as her second home. My father, despite his devastation, had one last demand before he made any decisions: a DNA test. If she had lied about her marriage, what else had she hidden? And if those boys weren't his, what then? My mother, for the first time, looked nervous. When the results finally arrived, the weight in my father's chest became unbearable. The truth was undeniable. The twins? They weren't his. My youngest brother? Also not his. 20 years of fatherhood, wiped away in a single sheet of paper. He sat there, staring at the results, fingers gripping the edges, his expression unreadable. But when he finally spoke, his voice was hollow. I need time. My mother, always quick with an excuse, tried to speak, to justify, to soften the blow. But he held up a hand, silencing her. The damage was done. And some things couldn't be forgiven. I watched as she finally faced the consequences of her own destruction. The woman who had played with all our lives was now standing alone. My father refused to share a bed with her. My brothers, devastated, withdrew. Even the few family members who had defended her started to back away. The respect she had spent, years demanding, gone? And the worst part? She still didn't seem sorry. Maybe she never had been. But whether she cared or not, one thing was clear. This was only the beginning of her downfall. There was no saving my marriage, not that he even tried. After everything, after 22 years, I didn't just want him out of my house. I wanted him out of my life. So I did what any woman in my position would do. I called a lawyer. The divorce process started immediately, and that's when reality smacked him in the face. He had been so busy sneaking around with my mother that he forgot one crucial detail. I helped build his business. And legally, that meant half of it was mine. Watching his expression shift from arrogance to panic was almost satisfying. Almost. He fought it, of course. He tried to argue, to manipulate, to guilt-trip me. But there was nothing left for him to hold over me. The law was on my side. The house, mine, the assets, split, and that business he thought he built alone, he would be signing over a hefty chunk of it. That's when his anger truly surfaced. Not when he got caught, not when he hurt our family, but when he realized that betrayal came with a price. He slammed his fists on the table during mediation, voice tight with rage. "You're ruining me!" I met his glare head on. "No, you did that yourself." But if losing money was a punch to the gut, what came next nearly knocked him off his feet. See, when he started this double life, he thought he was managing 5 children. Now, with the truth out, he had 7. My younger brothers, his secret sons, were now legally his responsibility. Child support, medical expenses, college funds. His eyes darkened when he did the math, and I saw the realization hit. He wasn't just losing money. He was gaining 2 extra dependents. The irony was almost poetic. He had spent years hiding his sins, and now he was paying for every single one of them. As the legal battle raged on, I braced myself for the next storm. Because this wasn't over, not by a long shot. My ex-husband was bitter, my mother was unraveling, and my children were caught in the wreckage. And through it all, I was just trying to survive. But deep down, I knew something else was coming. A fight I hadn't seen yet. A final betrayal I hadn't anticipated. Because men like him, they never go down quietly. I thought the worst was behind me. I thought once the truth was out, once the divorce was in motion, I could finally start healing. But I underestimated the damage. My older kids, my daughter and the twins, were done with their father. They cut him off like a dead limb, refusing to answer calls, blocking him on every platform. And honestly, I didn't blame them. But my youngest daughter, my 14-year-old, wasn't as quick to walk away. Instead, she was furious. At me. "You ruined our family," she spat one night, her voice shaking with anger. It knocked the breath out of me. I wanted to scream, to make her see the truth. But how do you explain to a child that the person she idolized never really existed? The tension in the house became unbearable. Every conversation felt like walking through a minefield. My youngest lashed out at every turn, taking her father's side, insisting that I had overreacted. My ex, of course, fed into it, painting himself as the victim. "Your mother wants to erase me from your life," he told her, twisting reality to fit his narrative. And the worst part? She believed him. Every argument ended with slammed doors and muffled sobs. I was losing her, and I didn't know how to stop it. The stress wrapped around my chest like a vice, squeezing tighter each day. Then, my body started failing me. The sleepless nights, the constant stress, it all caught up. At first, it was just stomach pains, easy to ignore. But they got worse. Sharp, burning sensations that left me doubled over. I couldn't eat without feeling sick. I barely had the energy to get out of bed some days. When I finally went to the doctor, the diagnosis was clear: stress-induced ulcers. My body was literally breaking down under the weight of it all. And that's when I knew I needed help. I couldn't keep pretending I was fine. So I did something I never thought I'd do. I started therapy. At first, it felt like admitting defeat. But as I sat in that chair, pouring out years of buried pain, I realized something. This wasn't just about my ex. This wasn't just about my mother. This was about me, about healing, about taking back the pieces of myself they had stolen. But just as I started to regain control, my ex-husband made his next move. And this time, he wasn't just coming for me. He was coming for my truth. Just when I thought I had nothing left to fight, my ex-husband found a way to drag me back into
the chaos. This time, he wasn't playing the guilty, remorseful man. No. Now, he was the victim. Out of nowhere, he demanded a paternity test.
Not for the twins, not for my younger brother, for my unborn child. My hands shook as I read the legal notice. He was accusing me of infidelity. Me. The sheer hypocrisy of it would have been laughable if it didn't make my blood boil. This wasn't about truth. This was about revenge. I knew exactly what he was doing. He couldn't stand that I was moving on, that I was healing, that I was taking control of my life. So, he did what cowards do. He tried to smear me. "She's not as innocent as she claims," he whispered to anyone who would listen. She knew about the affair. She used it as an excuse to do whatever she wanted. Lies. Every single word. But in this world, perception is everything. And suddenly, I wasn't just a betrayed wife. I was the woman who might have been cheating all along. I had to fight back. I met with my lawyer, laid everything out, and refused to let him rewrite history. I had been faithful. I had been loyal. And unlike him, I had nothing to hide. So, fine. Let him demand a test. Let him dig his own grave. Because when the results came back, they would prove what I already knew. He was wrong. But what I hadn't expected was the damage his lies would cause in the meantime. People started questioning me, whispering, looking at me differently, as if I was the one who had destroyed our family. And that's when it hit me. This wasn't just about my ex. This ran deeper. Because when my aunt heard about the scandal, she called me with a revelation of her own. "Sweetheart, this isn't new in our family." My stomach twisted as she spoke, as she unraveled the past I never saw coming. Infidelity wasn't just a mistake my mother made. It was a pattern, a cycle, a legacy of betrayal passed down like an inheritance. And for the first time, I wondered, was I doomed to repeat it? I thought I knew my family, thought I understood where I came from. But as my aunt spoke piece by piece, that illusion shattered. "Your mother wasn't the first." The words sent a chill through me. Apparently, infidelity wasn't just something she did. It was something she learned. My grandmother, my great aunt, even distant relatives, they all had their own versions of the same story. Secret affairs, hidden children, husbands raising kids that weren't theirs. It had been happening for generations, whispered behind closed doors, swept under the rug like it was normal. But the worst part? No one ever talked about it. And then came the final blow. My mother, so quick to justify her actions, so indifferent to the pain she caused, admitted it. She had been cheating since I was 6 months old. "Your father was never enough," she shrugged, as if that excused everything. I needed more. More. That's all this was to her. Just a selfish, endless need. She spoke as if love was a transaction, as if commitment was a choice she never really made. I wanted to scream, to shake her, to make her feel something, guilt, regret, anything. But she just stared at me, unbothered. The more she talked, the clearer it became. She wasn't sorry. Not for the affair, not for the damage, not even for my father, who had spent years loving a woman who had never truly been his. "Marriage isn't about love," she said. "It's about survival." And suddenly, everything made sense. She had spent her entire life manipulating people, making them believe she was someone she wasn't. And now that the mask was off, she wasn't scrambling to put it back on. No, she was standing in the ruins, proud of what she had done. But here's the thing about generational curses. They only continue if you let them. My mother had followed in my grandmother's footsteps, but I refused. I wasn't her. I wasn't going to be her. My marriage had been a lie, my trust shattered, but I still believed in something real. I still believed in loyalty, in love that wasn't tainted by deceit. And no matter how much she tried to justify it, no matter how deep this history ran, I knew one thing for sure. I would never let this cycle continue. The past had already done enough damage. Now, it was time to take back my future. The divorce was finalized, and with it, I secured full custody, at least for now. My children, the ones who still spoke to me, were my focus. They had lost a father, a grandmother, a sense of security. And I had to be strong for them, even on the days when getting out of bed felt impossible. The house felt different without him, without her, quieter, lighter. But every now and then, I'd catch myself expecting him to walk through the door, expecting my mother's voice to echo down the hallway. Ghosts don't just disappear overnight. Meanwhile, my ex-husband was forced to confront his demons, whether he wanted to or not. Therapy wasn't a choice anymore. It was survival. He was unraveling, drowning in the consequences of his own actions. I heard through mutual contacts that his business was struggling, that his own family was divided over what he had done. The man who once thought he could control everything was now at the mercy of the fallout. And my mother? Her arrogance finally caught up with her. The church had cut ties, her friends had turned their backs, and then the final reckoning. Legal trouble. Turns out deceit has a way of catching up to you. Even the children who once defended her started to see the truth. Slowly, painfully, they pulled away. By the time the dust settled, she had no one left. And for the first time, I wondered, was that enough? Would she ever truly pay for what she did? But then, I realized I didn't care anymore. Her punishment wasn't mine to decide. She had lost everything, and I wasn't about to waste another second thinking about her. I had spent my life chasing closure, but maybe the real answer wasn't justice. Maybe it was just walking away. And so, I did. I stepped forward, into a future I was still terrified of, but one I would build on my terms. No more lies, no more betrayal. Just me, my children, and the life we deserved. The past would always be a part of me, but it didn't define me. And as I looked ahead, I realized something. I wasn't just surviving. I was free.
Keep watching our stories by clicking on one of the videos that appear on the screen, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to be alerted about new videos. See you next time.